In a burning village, a girl in Yukata witnessed a rain of bombs drop from fighter planes. People were fleeing for their lives. The girl and her mother were both running for safety. Unfortunately, the mother was crushed by debris. A person tries to summon somebody, turns out it was the little girl. The girl was later engulfed in flames while being transported to the other world. In the present, on a sunny day, Satoru Mikami looks back on his life on what he hadn't accomplished yet. All he hadn't done was to try to get a girlfriend. Later, Satoru heard his name being called by his junior at work, Tamura. Tamura introduces his new fiancée, Miho Sawatari, to Satoru. While the three were having a pleasant talk and were about to head to a nearby restaurant, Satoru was stabbed in the street by a random man with a knife. Luckily, Tamura and Miho were safe because Satoru had pushed them to safety. While blood was pouring out from Satoru, a mysterious voice can be heard, granting him a body that doesn't require blood, as well as various abilities like Predator, Great Sage, and various resistances. The voice can only be heard by Satoru, while the surrounding people couldn't hear the voice. Satoru Mikami requested his last wish to be fulfilled by Tamura, which was to destroy the contents of his hard drives. With nothing else to do while he comes to terms with his condition, Mikami eats Hippocrate herbs and collects magic ore, and eventually, after 3 months, settles into his Great Sage powers and gains a odd companion in the form of a voice in his head that explains various things about the things that Mikami comes into contact with. Eventually, Mikami accidentally launches himself into Veldora while learning how to swim. Veldora teaches the blind slime how to see using magic, through which Mikami finally confirms that he indeed has been turned into a slime, as well as learning the identity of his teacher, Veldora the Storm Dragon. 300 years ago, Veldora was trapped in the cave using the magic spell Unlimited Imprisonment by a hero, and now he only expects to live for another 100 years before his dwindling magical power finally kills him. According to Veldora, Mikami is a unique existence in the world. Yes, there are other people who have been brought to this world. Most of them have been summoned against their will, and to do various complications die off quickly. Some, like Mikami, die and get reincarnated, but usually as the same species they were in their past life, a human, and of those only Mikami has been reincarnated as a non-human, a slime. After some back and forth, the slime and dragon agreed to become friends. Mikami and Veldora discuss the idea of leaving the cave. While the slime is free to go anytime he wants, Veldora remains trapped. Towards that end, Mikami wants to use Predator to study the barrier and find a way of dismantling it using Great Sage. At a minimum, Mikami will contain Veldora's dwindling magic reserves and ensure that he doesn't fade away. Veldora agrees to the plan, but before they continue, he gives the slime the name Rimuru and asks the slime for a last name for both of them, Tempest. Once the newly christened Rimuru Tempest eats the dragon, he learns, to his disappointment, that he can no longer communicate with him. At the same time, various monsters and governments since the dragon's disappearance have begun moving to investigate and take advantage. Instead, Rimuru eventually finds the way out of Veldora's cave thanks to a trio of adventurers sent to investigate Veldora's prison. Over the next month, Rimuru hunts and eats a variety of different monsters and steals their abilities, learns how to swim and fire a water blade, and continues to strip the cave of resources. Finally, Rimuru finds his way out of the cave and eventually comes into contact with a group of goblins. The goblins explain that after the disappearance of their guardian deity, Veldora, various monsters have started moving into the forest trying to stake their claim. Among them, a group of direwolves have been attacking them. The goblins, weak in body and armed with poor equipment, stand no chance against the wolves that both outnumber and outgun them, and so witnessing the great power of Rimuru Tempest's aura, request his help. Rimuru, thinking briefly on his past life and his inability to say no, agrees to help the goblins fend off the wolves. As the first step to helping the goblins fend off the Tempest wolves, Rimuru uses the Hippocrate grass potions he's been creating to heal all of the injured goblins, bringing their fighting forces back up to their near peak. Secondly, he has the goblins dismantle their homes and build fences that he reinforces using the sticky and steel silks he got from the giant spider in the cave, and builds traps using the nearly invisible thread. When the wolves arrive, they get caught in Rimuru's silk traps, and the goblins hit them with crude bows and arrows, putting up an effective defense. The direwolf boss is undeterred and charges in, getting caught up in Rimuru's silk trap. Rimuru gives the boss one chance to turn back and run, and when he refuses, he decapitates him using Waterblade. With the matter of the enemy leader dead, Rimuru devours the former boss's corpse and takes on his form, giving the wolves the option of submission, retreating, or death. While it initially seems like the other wolves intend to keep fighting, they ultimately submit to Rimuru. The next morning, Rimuru, who realizes that he is now responsible for now not one but two groups of monsters, decides to take measures to make sure they get along. As a start, realizing that he has approximately the same number of goblins and wolves, has them pair up and dub them Goblin Riders. The second issue, realising that none of the other monsters there have names, decides to name each and every one of them for the sake of his own convenience. In honour of the dead Rigor, his brother is also named Rigor, while the chief is named Rigurd, with each individual glowing yellow briefly when named. When the time comes to name the wolves, in spite of the chief insisting that he breaks for a while, Rimuru simply takes his family name of Tempest and Wolf's racial name of Fang and dubs the new leader of the pack Ranga. Suddenly Rimuru's body collapses and enters low activity mode, the great sage informing him that he used up too much magical power. When Rimuru awakens, he sees an unfamiliar young lady watching over his body. Rigurd, now in a much bigger and much stronger body in the form of a hobgoblin, comes in and explains that they've evolved thanks to Rimuru naming them. Likewise, Ranga comes in and explains that because of the name Rimuru gave him, they've evolved into Tempest Wolves, causing Rimuru to realise he's made a new problem. Because the goblins and wolves are so much bigger than their previous housing, feeding and clothing methods are now non-viable. As a start, Rimuru assigns the monsters into a group to hunt and gather food, thus averting one crisis for the time being. Although Rimuru was a project manager with a basic understanding of modern infrastructure, in his past life an architect he is not. Consulting with Rigurd, Rimuru decides that he and a party of goblin riders will travel to Dwargon to barter for assistance from the dwarves living there. As Rimuru and his party consisting of 5 Tempest Wolves including Ranga and 5 goblins including Rigor and Gobta spend a few days travelling to the city of Dwargon, Rimuru questions the goblins on various topics. As a start, he asks Rigor about who named his brother Rigor the first. According to Rigor, his brother was named by a passing lieutenant in the Demon Lord's army, a fact that makes Rimuru mildly concerned. Rimuru also questions Ranga to determine if he is holding a grudge against him for the death of his father. For Ranga, the subject of his father is not an issue. He holds no lingering feelings of loyalty compared to his gratitude for Rimuru sparing him and his pack's lives and naming them. Once the group arrives outside of Dwargon, Rimuru instructs most of the goblins and the wolves to stay back while he enters the line with Gobta. Once in the lineup, Rimuru and Gobta are quickly harassed by a group of adventurers who see them as weak monsters and wish to mug them. Having already instructed the goblins and wolves not to attack humans unprovoked, Rimuru instructs Gobta to plug his ears and turn around. Rimuru assumes the form of the newly evolved former wolf chief and uses intimidation to try to scare the adventurers off. Met with overwhelming success, Rimuru terrorizes the other people in the lineup and is immediately captured by Dwargon's guards. Fortunately, Rimuru's story lines up with eyewitness reports, and since no one was hurt, the guard captain Kaido feels inclined to let them go after a bare minimum amount of time. At that time, one of the guards charges in and reports that a group of miners have been injured in an attack by an Armosaurus and they have no potions to heal them. Rimuru chimes in and trades in a large amount of his high-quality health potion in exchange for his freedom. Once the dwarves are healed, Kaido agrees to take him to the best blacksmith that he knows. Kaido takes Rimuru to his brother Kaijin, who also turns out to be the boss of the 3 miners Rimuru healed. While the dwarf is grateful for the safe return of his employees, he is already in the middle of an order for the kingdom. Kaijin has to make 20 magic swords for the kingdom, and thanks to the work of a minister named Vesta, he has no time and no magic ore to make them. Rimuru recalls his time in the cave and regurgitates refined ore in the form of a chunk of magisteel. He also requests the one magic sword that Kaijin has already produced. Predating the sword, Rimuru instructs the Great Sage to manufacture 19 copies of the weapon made out of magic steel and regurgitates them, thereby completing Kaijin's order for him. In exchange, Rimuru explains that he needs the use of an architect to build his village and a craftsman to make clothes and weapons for his people. Agreeing to Rimuru's terms, Kaijin takes him to a bar staffed entirely by elven women who weigh on the slime and 4 dwarfs hand and foot to celebrate. While still at the bar, one of the elves working there offers to read Rimuru's future in order to find the person who he is destined to meet. In the crystal ball, Rimuru is treated to a vision of a woman and 5 children, leading Rimuru to wonder who they are. Around the same time, a local minister, Vesta, pipes up and questions Kaijin on what he's doing there when he should be trying to complete his order. However, Kaijin explains that he already sent in all 20 of the longswords he was made to complete, surprising the noble. Deciding to quickly change the topic, Vesta comments that he's more concerned that a lowly slime has been let into such a high-class establishment and makes his displeasure known by dumping a mug full of alcohol on Rimuru. Kaijin, thoroughly enraged by Vesta's disrespectful behaviour, punches him clean out. Though Rimuru is initially concerned that this will cause trouble for Kaijin and the bar, Kaijin asks that Rimuru take him to his town to act as the artisan that Rimuru required. Unfortunately, Kaijin's brother Kaido is forced to arrest the 4 dwarves and 1 slime and keep them as a prisoner until their trial. Once inside of the prison, again Rimuru realises that he left Gobta tied up in the cell, who is still asleep. Rimuru wakes the sleeping goblin and informs him that if he wants out of this silky prison, he will have to summon his Tempest Wolf and get himself out. Kaijin apologizes for his behavior and explains to Rimuru his history with Vesta. Originally, Kaijin was a captain of one of 7 orders of royal knights under King Gazelle Dwago's command, and Vesta was his aide. Unfortunately, one day of Vesta's projects, the Magi-Soldier project, spectacularly malfunctioned as a result of Vesta's rush, and Vesta pushed the blame on Kaijin, who was forced to resign. Since then, Vesta constantly makes unreasonable demands of the dwarf smith, trying to get him into trouble. Despite that, Kaijin insists that Vesta isn't a bad person at heart and believes that he might be better if Kaijin leaves, which is another reason why the dwarf wants to go work for Rimuru. Likewise, the 3 brothers intend to follow Kaijin under Rimuru's employment. The next day, the 5 are called into court and quickly realise their trial has been rigged. Since the 5 aren't allowed to speak unless spoken to, their lawyer speaks instead, who makes it quite clear that he has already drafted their confessions. Vesta meanwhile has dramatically exaggerated his injuries and collected eyewitness testimony stating that Kaijin and his accomplices attacked Vesta unprovoked while he was in the middle of a drink. Before the 5 can be sentenced, however, Gazelle asks Kaijin if he ever intends to return to his employ, to which Kaijin says no. The 4 dwarves and 1 slime are banished never to return to the city. Along with Vesta, the king questions him on if there's anything he would like to say to him before he too is banished from the kingdom. Gazelle reveals that he knew who really was responsible for the Magi-Soldier failure all along, but because of his high hopes for Vesta, did not expose his lie, but now his antics have gone too far. Gazelle reveals the Hippocte grass potions that Rimuru created that is superior in ability to the ones that they can create, and now because of Vesta, all of their ties have been cut off with that slime. Thus, a teary-eyed Vesta is thanked for his service before being led out of the court never to return, his dream of one day being of use to the king utterly shattered. The brothers Kaijin and Kaido have a heartfelt farewell while the king looks on. He instructs an elven assassin to apprehend the lawyer before sending her to spy on Rimuru, acknowledging him as a threat on par with the missing Veldora. At the Kingdom of Blummen's Free Union HQ, Guildmaster Fuse debriefs 3 adventurers, Guido, Cavil and Eren, on the state of the surrounding area. Simply put, their intelligence combined with the trio's report has confirmed 2 things. The Eastern Empires are not moving on the surrounding areas, and the second is that Veldora has indeed disappeared from his prison. With this in mind, Fuse gives the trio 3 days off before he sends them off on another investigation into the Great Forest of Jura. While the 3 are complaining, they are approached by another adventurer named Shizu, who asks to go with them on their mission as the forest is on her way anyway. Meanwhile, Rimuru has returned to the goblin village to discover a change that has occurred while he was gone. 500 goblins have moved into the village seeking Rimuru's protection. After the Great Sage informs him that the goblins will be wiped out by other stronger monsters that are now moving on the village, the ogres, the orcs and the lizard men, he decides to take them in and name them. After exhausting all of his energy and entering low activity mode for 3 days again, Rimuru awakens to discover his village further changed. Under Kaijin's instruction, the goblins are now learning how to make tools and weapons, while Garm has taught the goblins how to make proper clothing. Duord is teaching them craftsmanship, and Murd is guiding them to make buildings, with a dash of influence from Rimuru, who lends his limited knowledge of the infrastructure of his homeworld. Gobta, who was forgotten about in Dwargon, has freed himself by summoning his Tempest Wolf and returning to the village by themselves, where they are now sharing their experiences. Rigurd has been made the official king of the goblins, with the former chiefs of the absorbed villages his goblin lords. Speaking of, Rigurd comes in with a report about a group of humans who have gotten themselves into a bind nearby. Cavil, Guido, Eren and Shizu are being chased by a horde of giant ants, several of which Shizu destroys with a magic sword, and the last Rimuru dispatches with black lightning. Once they have introduced each other, Rimuru realizes that Shizu is his destined one he's meant to meet according to the elven prophecy he received. Getting a better look at Shizu's companions, Rimuru learns that they are the same trio that he met on his way out of Veldora's cave. Rimuru breaks the tension using a slime joke he had heard from a video game that elicits a laugh from Shizu. Once the adventurers explain why they are there, Rimuru confirms that the Freedom Association shouldn't have any problem with them building a village over there. Meeting with Shizu alone, Rimuru confirms that she is from Japan, and Shizu confirms the same as him. The pair share their stories of how they came to be there, whereas Rimuru merely died and was reincarnated as a slime. Shizu was summoned to this world by force on the tail end of the Second World War. The individual who summoned her and pulled her out of the firebombing of Japan, so to cheer her up, Rimuru shows her images of the rebuilt Japan and of it being put back together. However, the mood is suddenly interrupted by some kind of painful injury on Shizu's part. While she seems fine, Rimuru is called away to discuss the building of the village. Shizu meanwhile has a flashback of her summoning and of the man who did the deed, leaving her body severely burned in the process. Just deducing that she had an affinity for fire, Shizu's summoner forcibly bonded her to a fire spirit named Ifrit. After Rimuru freed her of her bond to Ifrit, she told him about her past, about how she continued to serve the Demon Lord as his closed aide despite being forced to kill her friend Perino. After the battle, the Demon Lord abandoned his castle, leaving her to defend the rear. She then met and fought the hero. She thought she'd be killed after losing the battle, but instead, the hero asked her why she was there. She told the hero everything, and the hero reassured her that everything was fine. Shizu was finally able to let go of all the emotions she's held back over the years while the hero comforted her and took her under. One day, shortly after being summoned to the New World and bonded to Ifrit, Shizu and her summoner/master are attacked by the Great Margin Koenig. Deciding to treat the situation as an opportunity, Leon has his newly minted minion incinerate the Birdman. Satisfied, Leon asks the girl her name and decides to name her Shizu. After Shizu's injuries have been treated, she starts wandering around the nearby forest where she encounters a young girl named Pirino, who has befriended an orphaned fox monster that Shizu names Pizu, who grows bigger as a result. Deciding that the monster seemed friendly, the two bring him back with them to Leon's castle as their pet. Unfortunately, Pizu becomes openly hostile to Leon, and as a result, Ifrit takes over Shizu's body and incinerates both the monster and his owner, leaving Shizu severely traumatized. Waking up from the nightmare, the adult Shizu finds herself in the goblin village where Ifrit's aura is now acting up. Though Shizu likes the town, her quest to track down her summoner lures her elsewhere. That said, Rimuru states she's welcomed back at any time. On her way out of the village, Ifrit finally breaks free from Shizu's control and takes over her body and goes on a rampage. Rimuru orders the goblins to evacuate and confronts Shizu with Caval's party, with the adventurers realizing that Shizu is really a veteran hero also known as the Conqueror of Flames. To combat his enemies, Ifrit summons several salamanders to fight alongside him. Though Rimuru's water blade attack is initially ineffective against the fire spirit, he mixes it with Eren's icicle lance attack to create the icicle shotgun for use against the monsters. Once the salamanders have been defeated, Rimuru orders Rangar to take the adventurers away to safety. Confronting Ifrit alone, Rimuru is initially caught in a trap when he's consumed in circle flare by Ifrit. Although Rimuru initially freaks out, Great Sage reminds him that he has the thermal fluctuation resistance, which immunizes him against fire-based attacks. Instead, Rimuru uses Ifrit's own attack as a smokescreen to bind him in the steel silk, followed by swallowing him using Predator and separating him from Shizu. Once inside of Rimuru's stomach, Ifrit is confronted by Veldora, who laughs at Ifrit as he claims that he cannot defeat Rimuru. Rimuru is inside of Shizu's room waiting for her safe recovery. Shizue is depressed as she nearly killed her friends as Ifrit again. To cheer herself up, Shizu wants to tell her life story to Rimuru and he complies, learning about the events that shaped her life after coming to the New World. One day, Shizue's master Leon Cromwell was finally chased from his castle and Shizue was left behind as the rear guard. When Ifrit realizes that they couldn't defeat the hero, its fear gave Shizue an opening to reclaim control over her body, and with the anti-magic mask the hero originally wore, the influence of the fire spirit could be suppressed altogether. More importantly, Shizue was able to use that firepower, hence now how she became known as the Conqueror of Flames and thus became the companion and student of the hero. One day though, the hero disappeared without warning or explanation. After a long career as a solo adventurer, the influence of Ifrit began to assert himself. So to minimize her reliance on the dangerous power that would allow the fire spirit to rampage freely again, Shizu retired and became a teacher in the kingdom of Ingracia, where other world travelers learn about their abilities and the world they now live in. One of them even became the Grand Master of the Freedom Association. However, Shizue has reached the end of her natural lifespan and Ifrit's will has overtaken hers, resulting in the rampage the day before, hence Shizue's last quest, to find Leon and make him tell her the information she wants to know. While Shizue is glad she got to spend the last days of her life with such good people, she has a new request not for Rimuru, but for Satoru Mikami. Shizue wishes to die among the memories of her homeland so that she is not subjected to the cruel cycle of reincarnation of this world, and thus asks that the slime eat her as he had the cursed monster that had tormented her. Rimuru agrees and declares that he will find the man responsible for her fate and make him take responsibility for his actions. Inside of Rimuru, Shizue is reunited with the souls of her slain friends and her dead mother as her long hard life ends peacefully. Later, Caval's party and Rigurd arrive in Shizue's room to find what they realize is actually Rimuru in the form of a naked human, a slightly younger androgynous version of Shizue with blue hair and golden eyes. Giving the group an explanation as to what happened and proving he is who he states he is, Rimuru transforms back into slime and apologizes to the group for his impromptu private burial. Before the three adventurers leave, they ask Rimuru to turn back into Shizue's form so that they can at least say farewell to their friend's image. Before the three adventurers leave through Rimuru has the dwarfs manufacture new and improved equipment for the three of them. The group in turn promises to give a positive review of the village and recommend non-interference with their affairs. In the meantime though, an orc is travelling through the desert, and just when he collapses from exhaustion, he is met with Gelmud, who offers him meat and a name, Geld.